The Andor series has been surprisingly divisive among fans and its reception, and I feel like I'm kind of in the middle. So I sort of just want to talk about why I think everyone is frustrated on both sides of the pro and anti-Andor show. Before I get started, just for transparency's sake, for me, Andor was like a 9 out of 10 in regards to competence. As far as my actual enjoyment of the show, probably a 3. I rewatched season 1 to do my season 2 final thoughts, and Narkina 5 is the best part of the show for me, though I know it's obviously Gorman for many people. But as far as I can tell, there's the pro Andor show or series side that thinks Andor is the best Star Wars we've gotten from Disney. Some say the best since the OT, some say better than the OT. And then you have the other side of the fan base who either one is just done with Disney Star Wars forever, or they tend to like the more Dave Filoni stuff. They say this isn't real Star Wars, that it's boring, these sorts of things. And both sides seem pretty frustrated. So I kind of want to just talk about why. Because I think it's interesting, and I feel like I'm one of the few people that respects the quality of it while also not enjoying it. So I guess I'll talk about the Andor side first. The Andor side largely seems frustrated that the biggest criticism is simply it's boring, while at the same time people don't really seem to understand what's actually happening on the screen, whether they're not paying attention or they just aren't invested. I don't know. And I think the frustration of people who can't even explain what's going on, just dismissing the show out of hand, is pretty reasonable. I think the idea that Star Wars has to have lightsabers and has to have the Force, or it has to be created by George Lucas, who's at the Force's doorstep, to put it nicely, is all just really stupid. And it's also part of the reason we get such trash and why we can't leave this fucking 50-year window of a galaxy. All of these things, I think, do hold Star Wars back, both story-wise and as an IP more broadly. If you're limiting yourself to one area of time and one set of characters that all show up in each other's show and can't fucking die, Darth Maul, Star Wars is never going to get better because you've limited a galaxy-wide sandbox to one little fraction of itself, and at the same time put all these caveats on what the story must be and what it must feel like. And something that I find weird about it is I would imagine a lot of Star Wars fans like the idea of the EU. They like some of the video games. Obviously, the KOTOR games are way before anything in the Star Wars movies. The Darth Bane books are 10,000 years before. There's all kinds of books about Thrawn and the Chiss. There's books about fighter pilots and squads of X-Wing fighters. I've only read the Darth Bane and Thrawn books, to be fair, but it is all out there if you're interested. So to me, if you're putting caveats like it needs to come from George Lucas's inspiration, or it needs to have the Force and Jedi, and it needs to have a certain tone, you've cut off literally infinite possibilities. Really, Star Wars needs to be treated like a medium, not a genre, and that would allow for any story that you want to tell in the Star Wars universe to be told. I also don't think the idea of things like sexual assault or rape or certain types of grounded violence not being in Star Wars really makes any sense either. There's horrific things implied. They've happened on screen. They've happened in the EU, all under George Lucas's reign. As long as the TV shows aren't going full girl with the dragon tattoo in the rape scenes or attempted rape scenes, or whatever the case may be, I don't particularly care. And limiting things to what George Lucas would have wanted or his style really limits the stories that you can tell. I know things like Underworld and stuff were kind of in the works. The EU happened loosely under his reign, but Star Wars needs to grow beyond what the initial intent was at some point. And the reality is right now, if you're holding to that standard, which is just kind of a nebulous nothing standard anyway, we're pretty much stuck with Dave Filoni slop, where he's just jacking off to all his original characters and making sure that they're tied into every fucking important event ever and that they'll never die. That's what we're in for if the Star Wars fans don't acknowledge that it needs to branch out and at least have the creative freedom to take the story in places that it needs to go. So that's kind of where I think a lot of the frustration from the Andor fans is coming from. And before I get into the more Star Wars reasons I think people are frustrated with Andor and its fans, I want to just quickly say something that Andor fans need to accept accept, because I see a lot of cope about this online, is that they spent $700 million and no one is watching. Just to quickly give you a rough idea, the Nielsen ratings for the first 3 episodes were 721 million minutes watched. I think it was like third for the original shows or something. All sounds good on paper. If you take the run times of the first 3 episodes, you assume that the best case scenario is that everyone who watched Andor only watched the newest episodes and watched the episodes in full. You get 157 minutes. This is just pulled right from the Disney run times on the screen. And I wish this had commas, but you can see what you get is about 4.6 million viewers. If I wanted to be even more charitable, assume that everyone skipped the credits, knock off about 20 minutes for the 3 episodes, take us down to about 137 minutes to watch. You can boost it to about 5.2, 5.3 million viewers for the first batch. The second batch bumped up to 821 million minutes watching. Again, this assumes no one's rewatching the first week, no one's watching the first season at all. Everyone's just watching the new batch in full. This again gets us about 4.7 million viewers with the same formula. If I deduct the credits, you're still looking at about 5.4 million. And just to give you some idea of what that number means, I covered the Halo show very extensively, and season 2 peaked around 6.1 million viewers with the same kind of calculations and sort of hovered around 5.5 to 6 million all season. So that should give you some idea of how poor the viewership for Andor actually is. And the reason I bring this up is just to say right up front, it doesn't matter if it's a 12 out of 10 best show ever. You can watch it over and over 100 times because you love it so much if no one cares and no one watches it. And even though this wasn't really a complaint from me, I can at least sympathize with the people who say it doesn't feel like Star Wars. And while I think some of the phrasing that someone like Star Wars Theory uses wasn't the best, the whole bricks and screws meme.
You're not supposed to have screws in Star Wars. You're not supposed to have like brick walls that we would see in everyday life.
I think it's a pretty shorthand way, and it's pretty obvious what he's actually trying to say is it just feels like our world with different technology instead of feeling like it's in a galaxy far, far away. And yeah, that's not quantitative or objective, but that's a message that's clearly resonating with a lot of people because no one's watching. And actually articulating that thought out a little bit, I do think Tony Gilroy leans too heavily sometimes into the things that he's referencing. Gorman, as much as everyone loves it, it really did lean very heavily into this sort of French resistance aesthetic. If you've watched Rogue One recently, on their final assault, it leans very heavily into a D-Day type style. So I get when people say it's not jarring, but it kind of takes you out of it because it leans so heavily into it. And it doesn't even really make an effort to include aliens or kind of weird aesthetics. It looks like Europe on screen. And I'm not going to rehash the whole attempted rape thing with Bix, but I can get why a parent or somebody who thinks, oh, I can sit down and watch Star Wars with my kid wouldn't be expecting to see some kind of grounded attempted rape in a Star Wars show. And again, I'll stick up for Star Wars Theory here a little bit. He said something really dumb on a live stream.
It's supposed to be from a different world. Like everything, including the bricks and the screws, which is literally what Paul Bateman told me, which is something from Ralph McQuarrie. We got lost in translation, I guess. So everything that he made was supposed to be from not to remind you of this world, of something else. So if you want to use the word rape, then using a different space word, that would keep you at least, okay, well, they got their own little word over there.
What's a good word for space rape? People in the comments, let's hear. We'll vote on the best one.
And while it is a dumb thing to say, the context of when he said it was a live stream where they were kind of brainstorming a way to convey the message without it being so in your face. So yeah, it was a dumb suggestion, but an off-the-cuff comment like that, I don't think is a particularly big deal. Now, maybe he's doubled down on it since and I haven't seen it, and then he's on his own as far as I'm concerned. But brainstorming is going to lead to dumb shit being said. And the last thing I'll say about kind of the Star Wars fans side of it who don't like Andor is whether or not the Andor fans like it. Tony Gilroy seems to have a very good ability as far as writing morally and philosophically interesting characters, really good arcs, characters clashing as part of these arcs and conveying the themes. But for whatever reason, people simply are not emotionally connecting with these characters and they find them dull. You can say that they're too stupid to get it. They don't understand nuance. They don't understand what's going on. If people don't emotionally connect with the characters and get invested, again, it doesn't matter how well thought out it is. My personal opinion on this is that everything about the characters is so deliberate that it creates this kind of inhuman effect. I think part of the reason people are gravitating more toward Mon Mothma, Luthen, Cyril is that the show took the time to see some of their day-to-day life. You see how human they are, and they seem to have kind of clear-cut goals. And something about his writing just really feels like he fails to tap into sort of the baser emotions that appeal to people. Even when you're talking about something like Andor getting revenge on behalf of Bix by trying to go and kill Dedra, it doesn't really feel like this place of I'm overcome with anger because Dedra messed with my woman. It seems much more like this is the right thing to do on behalf of Bix, therefore I should go do it, and kind of detached from emotion. The same can sort of be said about Bix killing Dr. Gorst, where we just kind of get one quick scene, Cassian and Bix walk away from an explosion in slow motion. That's it. We see Bix is fine a year later. So while all the moral aspects and arcs and concepts are all really well done, for whatever reason, it just isn't connecting on that baser level that I think you need to connect with people on to really get mass appeal and buy-in. Whether you think it's fair or not, that seems to be the majority consensus from the fans. Because there's all kinds of shows where just standing around talking is a huge part of the show that people find super compelling, whether it's Breaking Bad, Deadwood, Walking Dead for a while. Pretty much any popular drama that you can pick is going to have large sections of characters just talking to each other, where people don't criticize it for being boring because they're so invested in the characters. And Andor is just not doing that for people, which I think is why you're getting the criticism of just, it's boring. When what they really mean is, I just don't care about what's happening because I don't care about the characters. Because the idea and the story of the rebellion being built up is absolutely something that 99% of Star Wars fans would be interested in on a conceptual level. I'm sure someone else who has the time and inclination can look further into it and give a better explanation than I can. And the last thing I'll say before I wrap up is that I kind of find both sides annoying personally. I find it annoying that a lot of the criticism just boils down to it's boring, or for Anna, that Star Wars girl just says, well, it's inspired by Les Miserables. If you want to say it's a cheap copy, that's fine. I wish there was more to it than that from what I heard from her. It's really irritating that these people also can't explain what's happening in the story, because then it really does kind of validate the Andorians' opinion that the people who don't like the show simply aren't paying attention. And the Andor fans themselves, quite frankly, I find condescending and insufferable. I've gotten so many comments saying that I don't understand the nuance, I don't have media literacy, and that's all fine. I don't really give a shit about the insults, but it's so annoying to just assume that if someone got it more, that they would like it as much as you do. The possibility that they understand what's happening and just don't like it, or other things bother them in the story, doesn't even seem to occur to these people. And part of the reality is, if I explain the broad strokes correctly and the intent of the show and the themes, and I just say it doesn't work for me, explaining it to me with more detail that I often notice but just didn't feel like saying because I have limited time for a hobby isn't going to make me like it. It's not going to make a regular person like it who's just watching the show. And I appreciate that they put the effort in there for all the detail. I'm certainly going to miss some details. I'm one person watching it one time and then making a video again because I have a job. None of that explanation is going to make me care more about the story or characters. There's zero chance I ever watch it again. And that is what it is. And I think that's going to be most people with this show. I'm sure there's a few hardcore people that will rewatch it over and over. Maybe they'll just rewatch the Narkina 5 stuff and the Gorman stuff over and over. But I don't think this is the type of show that's going to have the mass appeal that Star Wars needs to have, which probably wouldn't have been a problem if they hadn't blown out the budget. But I don't want to keep going on about that. These were kind of my thoughts on this rift that Andor seems to have caused. And I decided to be a milquetoast fence-sitting pussy and take both sides. Whatever. Maybe it'll help bridge the gap for some people. Maybe everyone will just call me a fag. I don't know. But if you're still here, you've seen the series, or you've seen all this drama surrounding it, let me know what you think. I try to respond to the comments that aren't just insults. Like and subscribe and all that shit. Thanks. See ya.